folks representing families from across the country. And tonight I've got Mr. Rothfuss here, 18-month member of this institution, came, I wager, not to make a point, but to make a difference, and has been doing that every day he's been in this chamber. I'd be happy to yield to the gentleman.
I thank the gentleman from Georgia for organizing this very informative special order tonight. And you're right, I came here to make a difference. I came here to be part of a team that wants to relight America, relight the job market, relight opportunity, relight the American dream, because people are hungry for it. They see this town that's out of control. They look at this town, and if they visit this town, they marvel at the growth that's happening in Washington, D.C. I challenge everybody who visits Washington to count the construction cranes they see, and the explosive growth, and the high-end shops that open here, and the concentration of wealth and power in this town. It's a scandal to the rest of the country. I see these construction cranes here on Pennsylvania Avenue. I'd like to see those construction cranes back in Pennsylvania, Mr. Speaker. But this is a very important discussion we're having about the actions that this House is taking to relight the American economy and how it gets snuffed out in the Senate. As we've reviewed this evening, Mr. Speaker, the House has continued to pass legislation that would move our country ahead, grow our economy, add more jobs, and increase wages and prosperity. And then there's the brick wall across the other side of the Capitol. And nowhere is the Senate's inaction more evident than in the budgeting and appropriations process we have here in Washington, D.C. The Senate and House have together managed to pass all 12 appropriations bills and complete the appropriations process on time by September 30th only 4 times since 1977. It's shocking. This House, Mr. Speaker, has been working to correct this problem. And I want to recognize the hard work of the House Appropriations Committee and my colleagues from both sides of the aisle. This year, the Appropriations Committee has already passed 11 out of the 12 appropriations bills out of committee. 7 of those bills have already passed the House here, most of them with strong bipartisan majorities. How many bills, how many appropriations bills has the Senate passed? 0. They've yet to pass a single one. The Senate's failure to do its work is disappointing, but it's not surprising. That's why I introduced the Congressional Pay for Performance Act earlier this year, and the bill is simple. The House and Senate must each pass a budget and all annual appropriations bills by August 1st, or have their pay withheld until the job is done. It applies that fundamental lesson that we learned in our first job. If you don't do your work, you don't get paid until you do. That's the lesson that millions of young Americans learned working their first job this summer. It's the lesson I learned on my first paper route. I didn't get paid if I didn't deliver the newspaper. It's past time for members of Congress to live by that lesson. Beyond the Senate's failure to execute their constitutionally prescribed job of appropriations, the House has passed, as you noted, more than 350 bills, including many jobs bills that Senator Reid allows to collect dust in the Senate. Over 98% of these bills have passed with bipartisan support, both Republicans and Democrats. As of this morning, Mr. Speaker, 195 of these bills passed without opposition. And House Democrats introduced 60 of these bills that now gather dust in the Senate. And again, the Senate refuses to act.
If the gentleman would yield, I may have misunderstood.
Happy to yield to the gentleman from Georgia.
I may have misunderstood what you said, because what my constituents believe is that it is partisanship that has shut this institution down, that it's Republicans fighting with Democrats, Democrats fighting with Republicans. But we're talking about over 350 bills that are sitting in the Senate that have passed this House, that we've come together on this House. You're saying 60 of those were introduced by Democrats?
60 of those bills, Mr. Speaker. You look at the stack of paper that the gentleman from Georgia has with him here today. Mr. Speaker, 60 of those bills were introduced by Democrats.
Wow.
And yet they gather dust in the Democrat-controlled Senate.
Wow. I thank the gentleman.
We passed dozens of energy-related bills designed to increase production, reduce prices, add family-sustaining jobs, and promote American energy independence. Bills like the Natural Gas Pipeline Permitting Reform Act, the Energy Consumers Relief Act, the Northern Route Approval Act, which is going to get the Keystone XL pipeline going. In May of 2013, 241 to 175. It's been sitting over in the Senate for 434 days. We passed dozens of regulatory reform bills to promote job growth and keep an out-of-touch and out-of-control Washington, D.C. bureaucracy in check. Bills like the REINS Act that the gentleman from Florida mentioned. Very simple bill. If a regulatory agency puts out a regulation on the economy that's going to cost more than $50 million to implement, suppressing job growth, bring it back here for an up or down vote. Let's restore that constitutional responsibility for both the Senate and the House, who have that responsibility for making the law. And let us take accountability for that. If there's a regulation that merits approval, we're going to vote for it. It's called being accountable. But you can't fire these bureaucrats who come up with these regulations that have a negative impact on our economy. We've also passed the Achieving Less Excess in Regulation and Requiring Transparency Act, known as the ALERT Act. It's an effort to improve thoughtful consideration of the consequences of regulation. And I offered an amendment to the ALERT Act. The amendment requires the capital bureaucrats to acknowledge if their regulations will have a negative impact on jobs or wages in a particular industry. Any such regulation will be subject to additional review to ensure that the benefits justify the costs to families and communities. The principle is simple. If Washington bureaucrats are going to implement rules that take wages or jobs away from hardworking Americans, they should take responsibility for and justify their decisions. It's important that regulators think through the impacts, costs, and burdens that red tape imposes on families and communities, and it's time for the Senate to come to the support of those individuals and those communities and take up the ALERT Act. We've passed several tax-related bills to help individuals keep more of their hard-earned money and to help small businesses add jobs and increase wages. Bills like the Child Tax Credit Improvement Act and the Student and Families Tax Simplification Act. We've also heard stories of people whose hours have been cut because of the 30-hour work week in the President's health care law. But the House has acted. That's why we passed the Save American Workers Act to restore the traditional 40-hour work week and help those who want the opportunity to work more hours and see their wages go up. The Senate has to act. Time and again, Mr. Speaker, the House has acted, but the Senate has not. I really thank the gentleman from Georgia for shining a light on what's going on at this Capitol. The production that's coming out of this side of the Capitol and then hits the wall on the other side. It's time for the Senate to act, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back to the gentleman from Georgia.